What's going on, everybody? Hope you're having a wonderful night or day. My name is the Blacksmith, also known as Sir Medieval, and today I wanted to talk about Pantheon Rise of the Fallen. This is the first Pantheon video I posted on this channel, but I wanted to talk about the interview that they did recently with the staff at MMORPG.com. This is the first time I'm reading it, but I wanted to react together with you guys. And I have been playing the game in its early access form, not as much as I would like to. I'm still like around level 5 or 6 on 2 characters, but I've started to get, more initiated with it, and I did actually cover Pantheon a while back, quite a lot actually. I did specifically get into the lore, as a matter of fact, as well, alongside covering the game systems, and it's something I'd like to do again as far as the lore and the crafting is concerned, at least on this channel. But this interview starts off by saying that earlier this month, Pantheon Rise of the Fallen launched into early access. The release is momentous, having been in development for 10 years with a few restarts and tragedies along the way. Pantheon finally launching in some way is a good thing, regardless of your views on early access, which is something that I agree with. The Pantheon game has been in development for a long time. Anybody that's followed the game over the years could probably tell you that there's been portions of the community that were worried that it may never come out. They were worried that it may fall into the same bin of dead crowdfunded games that have passed us by, like Chronicles of Illyria, Camelot Unchained, so on and so forth. But Pantheon managed to release this year, well, last year technically, 2024, and although it doesn't have all of its content to it, it does have some good bones. I believe there's 4 regions that I've heard of. One of them is very big as well, which is one I'm very much looking forward to exploring, called the Silent Plains. It's one that I learned a lot about in my previous days of covering Pantheon, and I've heard that the current level cap is up to 40, which is actually very much more than I thought it was going to be. As a matter of fact, that was surprising, but I could see you easily getting at least 200-300 hours out of this game, especially if you like the old school MMORPG experience like I do. I think you'll have a lot of fun with this one. The old school MMORPG experience is one that I've wanted to experience for a long time, because back when I had first started playing games, even though my first game was RuneScape back in 2003, first PC online game was RuneScape back in 2003, and I did play like World of Warcraft Classic back then, and I started jumping to a lot of modern day games, at least for that time period, but I didn't get a chance to experience ones like Star Wars Galaxies or Ultima Online, so on and so forth. So Pantheon was kind of like my way over the years of trying to hope for getting that experience again, like getting that experience in its prime and seeing what it was like. I also didn't get a chance to play EverQuest. But continuing on, it says that the road does not end here. Pantheon is still very much in active development, with more work to be done before they can call the MMO ready for its 1.0 release. With classes yet to be added, zones, and crucially important gameplay systems still to come, Pantheon feels like it's just getting started. Which is also correct. Right now, it does have quite a few races. I don't believe I saw, I think the Dark Mur is in there actually, but I know there's some missing. Classes, I do believe so. There's some missing there too. Also the zones, each race should have its own zone, and right now I believe the only ones that are available is Thronefast, which is the human zone, and then Wild's End, which I believe is the halfling zone. At first, when I was streaming it about a week ago, I was wondering if this was the elven zone too, because elves start there as well, but I believe elves are supposed to start in Fairthale when everything's said and done, and I think that's tied to the lore. So yeah, right now we only have Wild's End and Thronefast, and the majority of classes and races will be starting in Thronefast at the moment. But yeah, in addition to that, there's a lot of zones that haven't been implemented yet. Like I said, there's only 4 at the moment, so just taking a look at this map here, you can kind of tell that there's still a long way to go, but the game does have good bones in its current state. I will agree there. They continue by saying, from the jump, Pantheon harkens back to the classic era of MMORPGs, something a reviewer thinks Visionary Realms has really nailed in how Pantheon Rise of the Fallen plays even in this early stage. Creative director Chris Perkins tells us that the team is actually trying to do more than just feel like classic EverQuest. Rather, they are trying to thread the needle between EverQuest and vanilla World of Warcraft, as if there was a third game in the mix back in the day. Which I do like the idea of. Pantheon in its current state does offer that hardcore old school MMORPG experience. When you jump in, there's no in-game map. There is out-of-game maps that people have made, but you have to follow your compass if you want to utilize that in combination. You don't have a map in-game, and I believe there was going to be a cartography system going forward. I can't remember if I'm getting this mixed up with another game, but if there is, then in that scenario you may be able to draw up maps and sell them to other players. If not, then and everything's subject to change, so they just may decide not to put that in regardless. But somebody can correct me. I'm not sure if that was ever planned to be a feature or not. But another hardcore feature you'll encounter is when you get past level 5, at that point, whenever you die, you will be able to drop your corpse, and then when you do that, you'll have to, you have to get back to your body to get the stuff that was on you. As I understand it, you don't lose your equipment, just the stuff that was in your bag, but because of how the Pantheon system works and, how long it can take to, farm in camps and stuff like that, usually people aren't doing bank run, or how long it can take to travel to different camps. And there's even a huge dungeon, for example. I think there might be two, I can't remember, but I know for one of them, the Goblin Cave, people have said that there's like this inner layer, it's a considered a live-in dungeon, and the mobs started like around like level 4 or 5-ish kind of thing, and then they end up being like around level 25 once you get towards the end. In that kind of scenario, you would probably not be taking too many bank trips if you're trying to work your way down to the end. And then on top of that, if you die in there, you're going to have a hell of a time trying to get back to your body. That's something I do remember from previous tests, is trying to get back there and having to fight your way through. It can be quite the mayhem, just to put it plainly. But something that I do like there about what they're saying is that they're not trying to take everything from those old school MMORPGs and, just implement it into a modern day game, because, and I know I might get some disagreement with this, but I think that having that old school experience, making sure that that's there, that's the bare bone, that's the baseline, the crucial, the soul, right? You need to have that. But I think there are things in modern games that are done a little bit better and will probably be received better than those old school games did. For example, one thing that I've heard of is that in the classic EverQuest experience, crafting wasn't really as viable towards the mid to late game, and that's something that I kind of hope that Pantheon takes a different path on. I really hope that crafting is and does remain viable throughout the entire game. I'm not saying that it has to be the absolute best gear that you can get when you get to the very end, although I don't think it'd be, entirely like weird if it was. I think, definitely you should have great gear come from raids and dungeons and stuff like that. But crafting, with the systems that go into it, and likely at end game, I would imagine you're probably going to need materials and resources that come from those in-game content pieces anyway. I could see it being understandable if that does end up being like the absolute best gear that you can make. But that's one thing that I kind of hope they pivot on, is the crafting system. Also, I can't speak for EverQuest. I'm not really sure how the systems may have worked there, but as far as like open world PvP and stuff like that, people tend to not receive that stuff as well anymore as they once did. And I'm saying this is somebody that was able to enjoy a lot of open world PvP games over the years. Like I played, Gloria Victis and, a lot of the MMO, like Mortal Online, a lot of the MMOs that incorporate open world PvP in their systems. I played a lot of them and have been able to enjoy them. But one thing I've noticed is that people do not like these systems in the modern day. A lot of these games that incorporate them and have their systems built around it do not do very well. But sorry, getting back to the article, they say that I think we're on track and really nailing it with what we're trying to nail, Perkins explained when asked about the style of MMO Pantheon is trying to achieve. And to the casual observer, that might sound like a clone or direct throwback to EverQuest's pacing and mechanics and things like that, but the reality is we're actually trying to walk this line in between the two major categories, which would be classic EverQuest, which I would define as the original trilogy, and classic World of Warcraft as it launched initially, or very similar to the current classic experience. So in that sense, that's what I feel like to use the same phrase, what we're nailing right now is that evolution or third path. If you could go back in time to when WoW was launched and imagine a third game that stayed a little bit closer to EverQuest's social nature, some of its more classical design decisions in terms of things like a death penalty, a little bit more punishment in terms of the challenge of the game, and taking a loss or failing at something, there's a little more sting to that. That's kind of what Pantheon is trying to be. Perkins described it as a renaissance of that classical era, positioning Pantheon Rise of the Fallen as a potential third game that deviated from the path forged by World of Warcraft at the time. Instead, Visionary Realms MMO is trying to stay nearer to the EverQuest formula in terms of overall game design, whereas we know history has taught us that MMOs after that era tended to emulate World of Warcraft. Yet, that isn't to say that Pantheon isn't trying to emulate some of what made classic WoW such a juggernaut when it's first released. Which I have actually heard about this before. I've heard that, there was definitely clear indicators between EverQuest and World of Warcraft and made people flock over in droves from all the other games that were out at the time to World of Warcraft. And there was things that it did that hooked people in and really did well as opposed to other MMOs. Now, I can't really compare because, like I said, I didn't play the EverQuest experience in its classic version. I did play through a progression server a couple of years back, but only for a little while. I played EverQuest 2 far more than I did EverQuest 1, which is kind of weird to say. But he says that one of the most important things we're taking from World of Warcraft is the accessibility. Perkins explained. This means that the team isn't making things hard for the sake of making them hard and cumbersome, for example, but ensuring that while these systems might be harsher than maybe a modern MMO, they are still more forgiving than maybe EverQuest Classic. Perkins also explains that this could mean things like a less harsh death penalty, or simply making it less punishing for the new player, especially maybe a younger MMO player who never spent time in Ultima Online or EverQuest back in the day, but has tried to jump into Pantheon since it hit early access, which I think is a good outlook on that. Like I was saying before, I think that some of the stuff that the old school MMOs did probably wouldn't be as well received now, so I think for modern day old school kind of MMOs to find success, they need to bridge the gap between what made those old school MMOs good, and then also modernize it a bit, but not too much to where it feels just like another modern day World of Warcraft clone or something. Because these days, when these MMORPGs come out, especially right now, for example, like we had Throne and Liberty, and then we had New World, which I wouldn't say is quite as much, but I think these days we're either getting Black Desert Online and Arcade clones, or we're getting World of Warcraft clones, and then there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of in between there. That's just what I've been seeing these past few years in specific. But these days, I would say old school MMOs is where I start to feel like I'm home again. Like, even though I haven't played those old school MMORPG experiences that much, it still reminds me of a time when I truly did enjoy MMORPGs and it didn't feel just like a second job or more of the same. They say despite its aim to harken back to MMOs of yesteryear, Visionary Realms is keenly aware they are building an MMORPG that has to appeal to a more modern audience. While the MMOs of 2024 are much different than what was released around that EverQuest to World of Warcraft period that Pantheon is shooting for, and as a result, Pantheon also has to appeal to an audience brought up on games like The Elder Scrolls Online and Final Fantasy XIV as much as it will appeal to those longing for the Ultima and OG EverQuest days. MMOs nowadays are much less social than they once were. Paraphrasing the popular streamer Shroud, Perkins remarked that modern-day MMOs are less social worlds and more glorified lobbies, with no real sense of adventuring through a world, which I completely agree with. I think they have been like that for quite a while. Though Perkins does remark that in the first weekend of early access, it was good to see the younger generation who might never have played classic World of Warcraft, EverQuest and such, enjoy Pantheon's early iteration. That said, going too far into the old school feeling might not necessarily keep those players around, especially newer MMO fans who might like the shared world but want to explore it and enjoy it largely by themselves, while classic MMOs are largely defined by their social bonds, many of which were forged in grouping for dungeons, raids, and more. Modern MMOs tend to issue hardcore grouping content for more solo-friendly approaches, though many will still require a group on occasion to complete pivotal story moments or chase the best gear, which is something that I've already noticed and I've kind of seen for a while when it comes to Pantheon through the testing, is that you will have situations where there will always be situations where you can play as a solo player. If you want to do that, for throughout the entire game, there's always going to be the weaker mobs. So essentially you would just farm on, the non-group mobs or the weaker mobs all the way through, and then it would just take longer, but you can still do that. Or you can kind of flip-flop in between where you could, group up one day, and then if you feel like just sticking to yourself the next, that's totally fine. They say that this is one of those inflection points where MMOs are always evolving, but especially in the early access phase. There are still major portions of the game, major aspects of the game that are still evolving or in an incomplete implemented state. And the reason that's important to say is because one of those things I think people get wrong about this game, but by playing it you wouldn't necessarily see it, is that the goal is to make soloing not viable. That's actually not the goal, and is in fact the opposite, which is interesting to hear. I'm curious what he's going to say about this. He says that people think of EverQuest and games like EverQuest as group-only games for forced grouping games, and the reality is actually not anything like that. There were so many classes in EverQuest that could solo, some of them could even solo more efficiently than groups could progress. Also right now, I know it's probably due to class balancing, but I've heard like even the Ranger class in Pantheon's early iteration can solo group mobs like it's nothing past a certain point if you know what you're doing. Perkins state that where Pantheon finds itself right now is as a good group-centric experience. If you get a party of players together, that's where a lot of the magic really comes to life in terms of the combat mechanics, group synergy, and the challenge of the game. However, the team is working on the solo side of the experience right now, intending to make it a more viable option for players who might not have a few hours to spend getting to a dungeon and then going through it with a group of friends, but instead may only have a short amount of time in game. That's something that I do like a lot. I think that there will be a lot of people that these days, especially myself included, that are in that situation. You know, we have kids, we got real jobs and stuff, like, you know, all that fun stuff. We don't have as much time to be playing, you know, 14, 16 hours a day like we used to. I miss those days. And that's kind of been the reason that I haven't really played that much so far. But I have noticed that when I do have the chance to jump in, that I'm able to go around and gather some resources for blacksmithing to start leveling that up more, or I can just farm on, you know, some any kind of mobs. Like I think I was farming on the Gadai camp the other day. And he next says, times have changed and you don't have the same amount of playtime. I mean, even just getting down into the depths of a dungeon can take upwards of an hour sometimes, depending on the context. And if you only have 2 hours to play, then it doesn't really work. So we do want a robust solo experience, and that's kind of the next phase of what we're in right now, is improving that and making it more viable. Ultimately, the goal is that players are free to do either or, but that there would be incentives and grouping that would actually encourage them and motivate them to explore that. Also, one thing I did want to mention is that, and again, I'm not, like I said before, I'm not sure how it worked in EverQuest, but in Pantheon, when I talked about the corpse, you know, the corpse dropping on death and stuff like that, there are classes that can actually help you with finding your corpse. I believe the summoner can summon your corpse to you, but there are penalties there. And then I think there could be another class that can help you track your corpse. So that part's pretty cool too. And of course there is a resurrection mechanic, so you can be resurrected back at your body if like someone like a cleric can get to you. I think there may be a penalty there as well. But yeah, there's things that can help like alleviate that classic hardcore experience, and also it provides more opportunities to be social for other people. And also I've seen plenty of people who have gone around just buffing people in town and stuff like that. And I love that these buffs last so long, and that you can even do that without being at a party, because it also gives players another avenue on how to be social as well. So the Pantheon Rise of the Fallen has had a long development cycle, and not one that has been easy the whole way through. From its initial failed Kickstarter campaign to the loss of its most recognizable creative visionary Brad McQuaid in 2019, and everything else in between, from direction changes, art style revamps, and controversies, early access was a long time coming. Which, yeah, I was actually following the game through some of that. I think it was last year or the year before, 2022. It feels like it's been so long now, but they were talking about doing an entirely different art style direction, and everybody was on the fence. Like, it was like 50-50 as far as what everybody was thinking about it. The new art style was going to be more World of Warcraft like and less realistic like they had before. I was on the fence where, like, I was curious about how it could work. Like, I've grown to love the World of Warcraft kind of art style, so I could see the benefits of it. And if I can, I'll see if I can find some footage of how it looked beforehand versus new, and you can tell me yourself. But yeah, I'm actually not minding the new art style. Although one thing I did mind was last year, I believe it was the direction change that they had during development, where they wanted to do the seasonal extraction mode, which I think they'll be talking about in this article from what I've heard. And that one kind of threw me off, and I think it did throw a lot of other players off as well. But I think they're going to dive more into that, so I'll just wait till we get to that section. But they next say that Perkins knows this, and in a way sees the MMO's early access launch, which he admits the MMO right now is effectively in an alpha state, as a way to help put some of what he calls hyperbolic narratives that have formed around the game in the studio over the years. There are a lot of narratives surrounding the games, which, yeah, I remember some of them. Yes, it's been a long journey. We've had ups, we've had downs, we've made mistakes, we've had unforeseen, sometimes tragic events that have happened and absolutely shaken things up and taken time to kind of recalibrate. There's a lot you could point to and look at. We're one of those Kickstarter era games that has been in the public eyes for so long that it's taken on so many different narratives depending on what you look at and who you listen to. Also, one thing I did want to mention too from a long time ago, I covered this a couple of years ago, but when 2019 hit and that tragic event had impacted the company, there was a directional shift in the coding and the development of the game, as I remember. The way that the game was developed or being developed at that time, it wasn't going to work long term for what the team had wanted to do. There was more limitations in place as I understood it. So they had to kind of tear down and restructure the entire coding of the game. They had to do a lot of the art again, and a lot of stuff needed to be redone. And that's a big part of the reason that the development had taken so long. That and the limitation of funds, I would assume, and the different things that they were trying here and there. Some things when it came to the art style, even before they had decided to make that directional shift, they were trying to do to kind of improve the speed of how art gets pushed out, because Before AI, art wasn't a easy thing to do. Companies, especially crowdfunded ones, had a hard time when it came to the art system. Like, it took a while to do. It was expensive. That's why I was always very more forgiving when it came to that part of development than others. It made sense. But he next says that one of the most important things, I think, for shaping our narrative and correcting our narrative now and as we go from here on is getting more people playing the game. Because when you play it, yeah, you can see the flaws, you can see the gaps, you can see where there are still things in work that needs to be done, but you can put to rest so much of the hyperbolic narrative and the bad faith narratives that exist about the game and really judge it for what it is, which is a growing foundation of something that I think is on track to be really special. Crowdfunded MMOs have a stigma in the MMO world, as so many of them seem to languish in development for years, with developers either providing overhyped promises, little actual evidence of a viable product over the years, or creative controversy over something they've said, done, or failed to do. For every game like Pantheon or Ashes of Creation that might be taking much longer than initially thought but still shows progress, you've got crowdfunded games shrouded in controversy like Chronicles of Valeria, which is actually something I can speak of a lot myself. I personally was one of the ones that made the mistake of crowdfunding Chronicles of Valeria. I put $250 total into the game, and I really loved the premise of it. I thought it was a very unique thing, and at the time there wasn't anything on the market that I could see that was going to become even close to what they were trying to accomplish there, and I believed in the vision. It was a very unrealistic dream, and even though Chronicles didn't work out, Pantheon has been, and I've actually put a lot more money into Pantheon than I have Chronicles. Actually, I think Pantheon is the one I've spent the most amount of money in. I'm pretty sure I have the $1,000 pledge package, so I will say that this is one that I'm really hoping comes to fruition. Next thing they said is one of the major narratives took the MMOs community by storm late last year was its leaked and then announced 24/7 extraction mode and the fallout surrounding it. And this is what I was talking about. Yep, the mode itself was put forth as a potential way to drum up some more funding if the team decided to go that route, but moreover, it was also meant to test features faster and implement changes as a faster clip to get more feedback. The outcry was swift, and the team canceled the mode a few weeks after its existence had been leaked by backers in the first place. Perkins maintains that he is a big fan of the mode and mentions that it could be considered as a tool to use down the road. He said that we learned through that just how much wiggle room we actually have, and I should say, don't have. We do want to do right by our audience, and I think statements like that and realities like that prove true over time. You can say it all you want, but what separates Chronicles of Valeria from Pantheon or anything like that, both the game and the team behind it prove out in time. The intention here is to make Pantheon. It always has been, always will be. Everything we do is in support of that. While the 24/7 mode may not have been everybody's cup of tea, especially as it seemed that active development on the actual MMO Pantheon's backers were waiting for seemed like it was halting in favor of that spin-off, it eventually led into the seasonal model Visionary Realms adopted earlier this year. Taking it a step further, the seasonal updates were using a lot more information the team learned from the brief 24/7 extraction mode testing to pump out faster, more detailed updates, leading into the early access launch this month. You can make the argument that without the seasonal mode earlier this year, Pantheon would not be in early access right now, something Joppa agreed with when the MMORPG staff posed the question to him during their talk. The seasonal cadence also allowed the Visionary team to get things like the back-end infrastructure in place to keep an MMO online 24/7, which has resulted in relatively smooth, though as with any major live service game at launch, not perfect, server performance since its early access launch. Additionally, the seasonal cadence turned into what Perkins described as an incredibly effective development pipeline, which helped fuel the eventual early access launch. So me personally, I was on the fence of people that I started to lose interest in Pantheon when they started to talk about the 24/7 extraction mode, because I had played games before where that just didn't work out. But as far as like the testing phases and stuff of that nature, it did make me lose interest in the development as a whole in the future. It was just like an uncertain period, and I wasn't sure exactly where Pantheon was going to go, if it was going to turn into a battle royale or not, that kind of thing. But I could see the logic in them pivoting from that into the seasonal model actually helping the game, because if they, well, I didn't actually test it during the seasonal phase, but I'm guessing if they incorporated content in pieces, like in different pieces of the game, instead of like going from start to finish, and they just started incorporating it in pieces and changed the way that they develop to make it to where they just put pieces here, like they start at the end, put pieces there, go to mid-game, put pieces there. I could see that helping the game more than how they were doing it previously, where they were trying to build literally everything, or the majority of stuff, like the different race zones, etc., before they jumped into early access. The staff next says, one thing I always find interesting when talking to developers on long in development crowdfunding projects like Pantheon is just how much is out in the open for prospective players during the development process versus traditional MMO development. Since Pantheon is partially funded by the very players who want to jump into this MMO, development doesn't have the shroud of secrecy most games in the industry operate under. While not everything is shared during its development cycle, one aspect that has been laid bare as a result is just how long these games take to develop. Because of this, part of the aspects that make following a project like Pantheon or any other crowdfunded project exciting also make it frustrating when development deadlines are missed or large chunks of the game are thrown out mid-development, or in Pantheon's case, an art style was revamped during development. So much of this has happened at other studios, but we just never see it, which I think is a very valid statement. A lot of the time, like back in the 2010s and before that, before like Arcade and BDO and those games, we didn't really hear anything about these games in development. Like, there was games coming out a lot, but as far as the development cycle leading up to them, we weren't as in tune as it is these days. And it's more normalized to be in tune with the developers and for developers to share their development progress. And if this game was done back in like 2003, for example, that art style change and everything leading up to it, like all the dev blog posts that they made talking about their progress and so on and so forth, we probably would have never heard about that, and we would just see the very finalized product. And as such, it probably wouldn't have had nearly as much backlash as it did because we were following the development cycle so closely. But that's just my opinion on it. I think essentially we're given the luxury these days of being more in tune with what the developer's working on. Developers are more open, and I think that has changed a lot of people's perspective. I think that has even become expected, when in reality, they don't really have to share anything. They could just take our money and say, we'll finish when we finish, and we would never be none the wiser. But the next section, they say, I don't ever want to disrespect or disregard someone's frustration because I've been on that side of things so many times with games, and I get it. Perception is reality, Perkins says. But like you said, games take a really long time to make, and there is that kind of perception out there that a game like Elder Scrolls Online or Star Wars The Old Republic, or whatever game you want to point out, there is a perception that they started with the design in mind and a plan, and they just executed it and released it. Yep, good point. There's probably been a lot of games that have done these drastic changes that we just never heard about, and like I said, because we never heard about it, it's likely that because we never heard about it, and the access to social media that we have now versus before, if we didn't have Discord right now, we probably would only be hearing about this through like web articles and Reddit and stuff like that, and it likely wouldn't be as widespread. Or sorry, if we didn't have Discord and Reddit, probably wouldn't be as widespread at all. He continues by saying, and the reality is games go through incredible amounts of iteration, of trial and error, even in some cases scrapping years worth of work to restart in certain ways at certain times, and all of that happens before you even know that the game is being worked on. In the next section, since its launch on Steam Early Access, Pantheon has seen some pretty good numbers. The first weekend saw a total concurrent peak of 2,321 players on Steam alone, which, by the way, there is a pre-alpha client that a lot of us have been using that were original backers, so the Steam numbers aren't the only ones. As the time of this writing, Steam's concurrent player numbers have risen to 4,228 players according to SteamDB. It should be noted that these are simply the Steam numbers. Pantheon, just like I said, also has its own native launcher where backers have been able to play as well. According to Visionary Realms in a follow-up email with MMORPG, the total concurrent max is just under 6,000, while Pantheon boasts over 40,000 total accounts. It's important to note that total max concurrent players doesn't necessarily mean total players who have logged in during the early access period, simply the highest amount that has been online at the same time. There are also many potential backers who simply won't hop in until the MMO is fully released, and they do wonder about Pantheon's staying power, but right now it seems to have captured the attention of players either craving the old school feel or simply curious about the game they've heard about. It'll be interesting to keep an eye on these numbers as we head into the first stages of 2025. The journey ahead, which is the final section. Pantheon Rise of the Fallen is at the start of its next phase of development, one where the team can continue to add the features and gameplay systems that have been talked about for years, as well as iterate and respond to player feedback in real time. While we know that Visionary Realms is working on making solo a bit more viable right now, we also know that the team is working on getting the next class in the MMO, the Druid. Oh, interesting. Okay. Perkins states that while the Druid itself should be coming pretty soon in the new year, There is no current ETA on the Bard class, and while he knows there is excitement out there for the class, he doesn't want to put the expectation out there in terms of a release timeline because of the amount of work left to get Bard where it needs to be a truly great addition to Pantheon, which Bard is probably going to be the one that I end up playing the most, actually. There are some pretty special things we want to do with the Bard, with sound and our audio team, love it, and I don't yet have a good enough picture of the work that's going to go into that to give a reasonable timeline, but I think it's going to be worth it. Beyond that, Perkins mentions that the next area of the world is in development, Black Rose Keep. Sorry, I actually love this area. This is one that I remembered. I love the backstory of. Sorry. While the team aims at upgrading the game to Unity 6. Okay, nice. The engine that powers Pantheon. By the way, I've always loved Unity as an engine. I've never stopped loving it, even when they did that questionable stuff back a couple of years ago. But anyway, if you like the way Pantheon's progressed during its seasonal cadence earlier this year, there's also some good news. The development cadence for Pantheon post-early access launch should be incredibly similar. Which also, yeah, I have heard that they plan to wipe at least before launch, but before that, they likely won't do any wipes except for like any major bugs or exploits or stuff like that. Although I've heard that at the 6-month marker, they may do a wipe, but I'm not sure if that's going to remain true or what their current plan on that is. But they won't be wiping like very often, though. That part I know for sure. But they say that all of this is aimed towards the goal of getting Pantheon Rise of the Fallen's full 1.0 launch ready within 2 years of its early access launch. That's pretty ambitious, but Perkins is confident in the team that has been forged and refined throughout all the years of development, controversies, and struggles. We have been refined and shaped as a team to where now I feel very confident in what we can accomplish, is what he ends on. So I think that Pantheon has been through a lot. I think Pantheon has a long way to go. Just like he mentioned there, you know, they got 2 years to try to get it to its 1.0 state. That's a lot of stuff to put in. You know, that's all the racial zones. That's all the other zones that they're currently missing from the map, all the classes and all the content that they have planned. As somebody who followed the lore, there's also some really cool stuff that I'm excited for, like the return of the dragons. I'd like to follow up on that in future videos. But if you're somebody that likes Pantheon Rise of the Fallen, you're interested in maybe some of the more life skill or lore aspects, and I'd also like to do some deep dives on the dungeon content, the open world content, you know, just all aspects of it in general, while focusing mostly on the lore and crafting, then I'd love it if you give this channel a subscribe and stay tuned. I don't have a lot of time to really work on videos throughout the week, you know, with work and my little one, but I would love to do what I can and really dive back deep into this game. I'll also be re-uploading some of my old lore videos that I had on the Sir Medieval YouTube channel to this one, in combination with doing some new ones, starting with the Elven history, which I had planned about a year ago. Thanks so much for watching, folks. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you think about this article in the comments below. Have a good one.